I got about 15, 20 minutes, plenty of time to finish this up. I talk really fast, but you also have to listen really fast. Let every soul, verse 1 of Romans chapter 13, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whoso therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, the government official, is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. God gave us human government. And this clearly says we're to be subject to it. Now, y'all know me. I spend week in and week out fighting the government on your behalf, right? I told you, I will call a county official and fight for a church's religious freedom when they go too far. I've stood toe-to-toe with legislators at the state capitol, and I probably made, I told Corey one day, I was down there by myself, I said, I made a state legislator mad today. Then I said, or as I call it, Tuesday. I mean, I'm always making them mad at me, right? I'm not someone who just falls over limp whenever the government says do something. But I also believe the scriptures here that they are given to us as a gift of God, just like the church is a gift from God, just like the family is a gift from God. That's the third institution given to us by God is human government. And we are to we're to avoid resisting them, not only because they bear not the sword in vain and we could suffer the wrath of the government, but also it says for a good conscience before God. Right? And there's a real anti-government sentiment in our churches, and I'm concerned not about people who say, you know, government shouldn't go too far, we should protect our religious freedoms, we have that First Amendment right. I'm concerned about people who have embraced a libertarianism in our churches. By the way, it's not just with government, it's with their Christianity. Right? It says, in Christianity, here's how it's demonstrated. Well, if you can't show me a chapter and verse why that's wrong, then I don't think you should tell me it's wrong. All right? That's what our young people are embracing. I told a millennial, I said, look, your generation of Christians could be marked by the phrase, show me chapter and verse. And he's like, yeah, you're right. In other words, if it's not clearly prohibited in the Bible, then don't tell me that something's wrong to do. And here's how it's expressed in politics. Well, I personally don't believe in same-sex marriage, but I don't think the government should tell anybody who they should marry, who they can't marry. Have you heard Christians say that? Don't shake your head. Don't point to anybody. Here's how it's expressed. I personally would vote no if casino legislation was on the ballot. I personally would not attend a casino, but I think we should have the opportunity to vote for it. I've had Christians say that to me, right? It's a libertarianism that kind of suggests that the government is always wrong, the government is always evil, the government never has our best interest in mind, and I don't believe that's biblical. I think we take a lot of what the government does for granted. We take for granted the police that protect us, that you probably drove over here today without any worry that someone was going to, attack your car and keep you from coming to church. You probably came here to church, and I bet not one person worried that the Chinese Navy was off the coast of Georgia and was going to invade us tonight. Okay, let me just ask. Anybody worried about that before you came over here tonight? Don't do that because I might call on you. See, I'm joking. Right, we take for granted that there are people right now patrolling the waters, patrolling the airways, sitting in a room with a computer and a headset, listening into what our enemies are doing and protecting us. We take for granted that we had clean water this morning and electricity and internet, and we came over here, we didn't worry that we wouldn't be able to put gas in our car. I mean, there's an infrastructure here that we take for granted that the government provides for us. And I believe that government has gotten way too big and is involved in way too much of our lives. But I think we need to have a balanced view of government and not take for granted that God has given us this form of government. But to the point of the size of government, look at 1 Peter chapter 2. Another passage that talks about the biblical view of government. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 and 14 say this. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man or law for the Lord's sake. Just as Romans 13 said, do it for conscience sake. Whether it be to the king as supreme or unto governors. We would say in our form of government, whether to the federal government or the state and local government. As unto them that are sent by him, by God, for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. The Bible tells us right here the twofold purpose of government. Punishment of evildoers, praise of them that do well. Government exists, number one, to protect its citizens. Punishment of evildoers. That's government's role. And it's an important role. Whether we're talking about our streets or whether we're talking about our borders, government protects its citizen. If we're talking about even consumer issues where it protects its citizens from fraudulent business practices and other things. It's protecting its citizens. And then it's also for the praise of them that do well. Encouraging good businesses to grow and to foster. Encouraging people to give money to charitable organizations and incentivizing them with a tax deduction for that. Encouraging good behavior of its citizens and to be good citizens. Twofold purpose of government right there in the Scriptures. Our government has gotten too big, right? I mean, the federal government should not be involved in as many things as it is, from healthcare to education, and it seems like every other area of our lives. I think it should be much smaller, but that's only going to happen when we insist that. Most of us insist that they provide things for us and do things for us and give things for us. Whenever someone says something, nasty about lobbyists, I say, you got a lobbyist working for you. You might not know it, but what industry are you in? Oh, I'm a realtor. Oh, yeah, there's lobbyists on the state level and the national level for a realtor. Oh, I work for Delta. Yep, you got lobbyists at the state capitol and up in D.C. Well, I work for Georgia Power. Yep, a whole team of lobbyists there at the Capitol. Well, I'm just a small business owner. Yep, you got a lobbyist working for the Small Business Administration, right? There are lobbyists for seniors. There are lobbyists for the Atlanta Braves. I mean, everybody's got lobbyists working for you. And most of us want something from the government, and that's partly how it's grown and gotten larger and larger. Look, what should be the Christian's role in public policy? Well, we hear people resist. Oh, there's just no use. All them guys up in Washington are corrupt and no good. What's the point? I think you're just wasting your time. You know what? I believe Matthew 19:26. With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Amen. And I have seen that, whether we're talking about pushing back on casino legislation or whether just one-on-one conversation with legislators. I stand there waiting to talk to a legislator, maybe waiting for him to finish the conversation, and I'm getting ready to talk. I have no idea what I'm going to say. But the Lord puts the words in my mouth when it's time, and God helps us to do that. Other people say, well, the answer, Paul, is not lobbying like you're doing or all this voting stuff. All those politicians just need to get saved, and that would fix everything. Oh, really? So because the people in your church are saved, they don't have any problems? They don't have any challenges to being good parents and a good spouse? They don't have financial issues? Of course they do. Because being a Christian doesn't magically fix everything. We still need help from the Scriptures and from our pastors to make good choices and to do the right thing and to live the Christian life, to do the things that we're expected to do. I'm guessing that many of you have been in a situation, maybe on the job or somewhere where you have someone in authority over you who asks you to do something that you don't think is right. Maybe you think that's just unethical. Maybe you think, I think that's against the law. And what does that person in power say to you? They say things like, now we need you to be a team player. Now we need you to go along to get along. Now, Bob, he's going to be retiring in a couple of years, and his job as supervisor is going to be opening up, and I need a team player to be in that position. Now, are you going to be my team player? And you feel that pressure to fudge on that expense report, or to change your report that you're turning in, or something else. Just maybe look the other way. A lot of you are looking real spiritual, like you've never had that happen to you. Am I wrong about that? Now, if you struggled with that, maybe you went to your pastor, some other spiritual leader in your life, and said, hey, I'm not, would you pray about this? I want to do the right thing. And that pastor, that spiritual leader says, you know what's right. Well, look, these legislators, they're faced with the same thing. I mean, most of the guys at the Georgia General Assembly, most of those legislators would claim to be born-again Christians. But they've got the Speaker of the House coming to them. Now, I need you to be a team player. I know you don't love this bill, but I need you to vote for this bill because I need you to be a team player. Now, that chairmanship's going to open up here next year, and I'll be looking for a team player. I'll be looking for, a guy who knows how to get along, get things done for that role. The governor's office contacts them and says, look, we need to get this bill through. This is my bill. Are you a team player? Are you going to help me get this done? There's a bill that a legislator introduced that's going to help people back in Richmond Hill. It's going to be a good bill. And the chairman of that committee says, hey, I saw your bill. That's a good bill. It's going to help people back in your district. But I need you to vote for this bill over here. I know you don't like that bill, but if you want to get your bill done, then you need to vote for this bill over here. This is what they do. This is what happens every day. And sometimes you just need a guy like me to stand there and say, you need to do the right thing. Sometimes they need a constituent that says, hey, didn't you run that you were pro-life? Well, then you need to vote for the heartbeat bill. Didn't you say that when you ran for office that you're against casinos? Well, then you need to keep that campaign promise and vote. Sometimes they just need a reality check, right? And I believe that we can make a difference that way. The last scripture passage we're going to look at is Nehemiah, and then I have a closing illustration. Y'all didn't just come to church just to go home, right? Nehemiah chapter 4. You know the story of Nehemiah, don't you? So the walls around Jerusalem were broken down, if I've done the math correctly, about 150 years. That's a long time. And God called Nehemiah to rebuild those walls. So there's no point in rebuilding the city until the protective walls around the city are rebuilt. And it was an unbelievable task. They didn't have bulldozers and things like we have today. And this mess from 150 years, he goes to take this task on that God's called him to do, believing God will help him. And he hardly gets started when what happens? The enemies of God show up and start undermining the work and thwarting the work and trying to stop him from doing what God calls him to do. And in Nehemiah chapter 4, he finally realizes he's got to act. Look at verse number 13. Nehemiah says, therefore said I, in the lower places behind the wall and on the higher places, I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. Well, they were armed and ready for action. And I looked up and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. If that was written today, I believe we could add, and your churches. Skip down to verse 17. And they which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens, and those that laded or carried those burdens, everyone with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. Nehemiah rallied them. Nehemiah encouraged them. Nehemiah armed them. But here's what they didn't do. They didn't abandon the work that God called them to do. But with one hand, they held an implement of work, and with another hand, they held an implement of war. And I say to you tonight, I am not here to suggest that you need to abandon the work of the ministry at Bethel Baptist Church and come to the state capitol with me. I'm not suggesting that you need to forfeit the important work that you are doing in this community and come up to Washington, D.C. and fight the corruption up there. It's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, if there's ever been a day when we needed to fight for our religious freedoms, it is today. And if there's ever been a time when with one hand we do the work of the ministry here at your church, and with one hand we reach our community for Christ, and with the other hand ready to do battle against the enemies of God who want to stop us from doing that work, amen, today's the day. Amen. I mean, how much longer is it going to take? Right. I hear pastors just say, boy, 20 years ago, I never would have believed we'd have gay marriage here. Really? Then you haven't been paying attention, because this has been going on for 25, 30 years. And we've been yawning and ignoring and saying, well, they just need to get saved and everything will be fixed. We've been just doing our thing. Look, if your thing was you spent all your time winning people to Christ, then okay, you've got an exemption. You don't have to worry about it. That's not who I run into at these churches. We're doing our own thing. Right. We're doing what we want to do. No, I don't have time for that. You got time for what you want to do. Right. Now, I close with this illustration. And I may or may not have shared this in the past, but if I have, it bears repeating. I have had the opportunity, with the ministry I'm doing now and with the previous ministries I worked for, to go to Washington, D.C. for over 20 years. For conferences, for lobbying legislators on these issues. Every year in September, I go to the conference with the American Association of Christian Schools that they host every September. I use that as an opportunity to visit the Georgia congressmen and meet with them. That conference was held in 2001 on September 10th, 11th, and 12th. It was the first year of the new George W. Bush administration, and they invited our group of pastors and Christian school leaders from all over the country to come to the White House for a briefing from the White House staff. We hadn't been invited by the previous administration. We weren't invited by the subsequent administration, but we have been invited by the Trump administration, and we've gotten to go every year since Trump's been president. But as you can imagine, we didn't have our briefing that morning. About the time we were arriving at the White House to go through security, they began to evacuate the White House. Now, we didn't have smartphones. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew they were telling us to get away from the White House. I asked one of the security officers, like, what's going on? He said, well, we think a plane might be headed for the White House. It didn't impact me like it should, because I didn't know 2 planes had crashed into the World Trade Center and a plane had crashed into the Pentagon and that the White House could have been another target. I just moved away from the White House, kind of ended up gathering with a few of the people from our group. They went every which direction. People from the White House, as you can imagine, were exiting out of every exit they could get out of. They knew what was going on. They were terrified. And we had the opportunity to hear some of what was going on, because a guy just opened his car door, turned up the radio as loud as he could, and we were able to listen to some of the news reports that were going on that morning, some which were accurate, some which were not. But that's when I first learned, man, two planes have crashed into, wow, what is, the FAA has shut down all air traffic. I was listening to what was going on, like all of you were doing at that time. Well, finally, with all this going on, one of the preachers or one of the guys in our group said, we should pray. Yeah, I'm glad someone finally occurred to someone to do that. And we formed kind of little prayer circles, 6 or 8 of us. I noticed not only our circle, but there were a couple of more circles of our group of people bowing our heads, getting ready to pray, when White House staff, with their lanyards, their ID around their neck, were coming right past. Other people were coming past us, but the White House staff, a few of them stopped and said to us, can we pray with you? Well, yeah, of course you can. And we welcomed them into our little impromptu prayer circle. I could talk a lot more about that day in Washington, D.C., but I want to fast forward to a year later. We got invited back to the White House, and it wasn't on the anniversary of 9/11. It was the day before, September 10th, 2002. And they came out and said to us, one after the other, look, we know you missed out coming to the White House last year. We wanted to make today special. And we got to hear from, cabinet level people who, if you're a political nerd like us, people I'd only seen on TV came out and spoke to us. It was very cool. And finally, someone came out and hung the presidential symbol on the front of the podium, and we all went, what? Two very stern Secret Service agents came down and stood in the front. We're at the White House, mind you. Again, not the mansion, but the offices there. And sure enough, President George W. Bush came out to our group of pastors and Christian school people. I think there was 100, 140 of us there. And he said this, I know that you missed out coming to the White House last year because of the terrible events of 9/11. And it was important to me to come out here and thank you for being a help and a comfort to my staff on that terrible morning. Now, we had no idea that he knew we were praying with his staff, that how he found that out. But here, the guy who they call the most powerful man in the world took time to come out and to thank us for being a help and a comfort. Now, that's really not why I tell you that story. As cool as that was. I mean, on the one hand, it does show you that there is a need amongst those who work in the Capitol community for someone who can be a spiritual help, that can be a spiritual witness, that can pray with them when their wife's in the hospital, when their child is sick, or some other thing. And we try to be a ministry that will do that. But here's the other reason I tell you that. In the days following 9/11, and those of you who are my age and older will remember this, the first thing I recall is the wheels of commerce came to a screeching halt, right? Business, industry, I mean, Wall Street couldn't even open, right? But even if people went to work, they didn't get a whole lot done. The second thing I remember is on Saturday and Sunday, the college and professional football games were all canceled. Remember that? Unbelievable. Football games canceled in this country. And then, and I admit, I don't keep up with this very well, but I believe it was the Emmy Awards. That Sunday night, a big Hollywood awards show postponed, and several movie premieres were canceled. And maybe it was because I spent one more night in the hotel there in D.C. before going home the next day, and got the USA Today newspaper there at my hotel door. That's the only time I ever read USA Today newspaper is when the hotel gives it to me. I don't subscribe to it. But it's in that newspaper, there after the news section, the front section, there's three more sections. There's money section, there's the sports section, and there's the entertainment section. I think they call it the life section, but it's the entertainment section, right? And I guess, I don't know, the Lord just put it in my mind and helped me to put this together. As I thought about what shut down there those 3 days and the parts of our national newspaper, money, sports, entertainment, those are the three gods of America. And it's as if God was saying to us, not the lost world, but to the church, I'm giving you a chance. I'm giving you a chance to repent of making these three things your God and making me only your God. Now, I told you that 5 years ago when we passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, Governor Deal vetoed it. And who opposed it? Business and industry in Georgia, entertainment industry in Georgia, and the sports teams in Georgia. I thought, there it is again. As if God was saying to those of us here in Georgia, hey, you're going to have to pick. Is your religious freedom more important than the gods that you serve of money, sports, and entertainment? You know, we could even talk about that for this year with COVID, right? How that's impacted our economy and our sports and our entertainment industry. But my challenge to you is this. Who is your God? Look, don't misunderstand. There's nothing wrong with making money. I'm not saying that. Investing money, saving money. There's nothing wrong with watching a sports game on TV or playing some sports. Even entertainment. We obviously have to be careful, but I don't think it's wrong to enjoy entertainment. It's when those things become more important than God that it becomes a problem. And I leave you with the challenge that Joshua left the people of God in Joshua 24. Choose you this day whom you will serve. He said in Joshua 24, whether it's the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, I say, whether the gods of America in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Is that your testimony? I ask you to examine your hearts and see if there are gods that are more important to you than the Lord God Jehovah. Let's bow our heads for prayer. I'm going to turn the service over to Pastor Cooper in just a sec, but